year after the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, many Syrians living in Turkey are still not ready to go home.
We
will never stay here, We are planning to go back, but we are just waiting for the country to be rebuilt and the economy get better.
I'm Marco Werman. Syrians facing a tough decision if and when to return to their home country. Venezuelans here in the U.S. are dealing with a similar dilemma.
There are just going to be hundreds of thousands of people in limbo, like in migration purgatory.
And in Spain, more young people are returning to the Catholic Church.
These kids today are looking for silence, he says, to disconnect from the noise of the world and to find authenticity.
Plus, high fashion at Center Court and what is causing this bitterly cold weather today on The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Appreciate you making it here today. We begin in Syria. It has been just over a year since the ouster of longtime dictator Bashar al-Assad. Over the weekend, the new government struck a deal with Kurdish-led militia forces to bring much of northeastern Syria under the command of the central government. There's been fighting between rival groups ever since. Syria's long civil war displaced more than 13 million people. Only about 1.2 million refugees have returned home, according to the UN Refugee Agency. Duri Baskarin visited a predominantly Syrian neighborhood in Istanbul, Turkey, to hear how refugees there are deciding whether to stay or return home.
It's the lunch rush at a falafel shop in the middle of Istanbul. A big green and black flag of the Syrian revolution is hung above the cash register.
We're so happy that we couldn't even imagine that regime will fall. Like a dream. Came true.
Mohammed gives only his first name because Syrians without valid paperwork here are still at risk of deportation. Through an interpreter, he tells me he left Syria right at the beginning of the war.
We didn't feel it's 13 years because we didn't have time to think about what's going on.
Survival in Turkey depended on it, scraping together a living to support his wife and 2 daughters without knowing the language or having a network of relatives to depend on. But despite these hardships, he hasn't returned to Syria.
We will never stay here, We are planning to go back, but we are just waiting for the country to be rebuilt and the economy get better so we can, the Syrians think like that. No one want to stay here forever, but we are waiting for something to be established.
Millions of Syrian refugees fled to Turkey during the war. While many passed through to other countries, about 4 million stayed long-term, making Turkey one of the largest refugee-hosting nations in the world. But as the years passed, many Turks turned against refugees, and Syrians faced increasing levels of discrimination, harassment, even mob attacks that targeted Syrian-run businesses and neighborhoods.
13,5 yıl boyunca büyük acılar çeken, çok ağır bedeller ödeyen.
This week, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan voiced support for the agreement struck between Syria's central government in Damascus, which he supports, and the Syrian Democratic Forces in the northeast. The Turkish government has been eager for Syria's security situation to stabilize, in the hope that refugees will return and that Kurdish militias will no longer pose a threat across the border.
Suriye halkını dün olduğu gibi inşallah.
We will not abandon the Syrian people, Erdogan said. God willing, not today or tomorrow. In the past year, 600,000 Syrians living in Turkey have returned to Syria, according to Turkish government statistics, but more than 2 million remain. On January 1st, Turkey ended a policy allowing Syrian refugees to be eligible for free health care, and the Turkish government has indicated that it will soon remove temporary protection for Syrians who still live here.
6 years here. Come on, I don't want to talk about Turkish government. Oh my God, it is so bad.
29-year-old Saleh Nezar Salem says living in Turkey is fine if you're Turkish, but for Syrians, it's a much different story. These policies make it hard to have a life here.
I don't want to get rich. I don't want Ferraris. I don't want Lamborghinis. I want to be myself in my home. So there's a big difference between house and a home. I want a home.
His plan is to leave Turkey, but not to return to Syria. Other Syrians in Turkey have made a life for themselves, and they plan to stay, at least for a while. In the sloping streets near the 18th century Fatih Mosque, Syrian-owned restaurants sell delicately spiced lamb and sour cherry kebabs, a specialty from Aleppo. A bookstore boasts thousands of titles, all in Arabic. Another shop sells specialty honey. It's owned by a father of 4 who asked not to share his name out of fear that it could affect his stability in Turkey. He learned the profession back in Ghouta, before the area was devastated by chemical attacks, aerial bombardments, and a 5-year siege. There was no food. He remembers people eating leaves from the trees. He and his family escaped the city through underground tunnels and eventually made their way to Turkey. He and his wife worked as Arabic teachers, which allowed them to receive Turkish citizenship. And now, he says proudly, his kids are grown up. They learned Turkish, attended university, got married. He says he feels a strong pull to return to Syria, to rebuild his home. But when he went back for a visit 2 months ago, he quickly realized the country has a long way to go. It was like a patient who had just returned from the emergency room, he says. The country is so tired. He says he realized on that trip that the economy is so bad, even honey is a luxury. Your homeland, it's not just about the feeling, he says. It's about living in dignity. For The World, I'm Jerry Buscarin, Istanbul.
Weather originating in the Arctic is about to get very real for people in North America. However cold you're imagining it'll be, think colder than add ice and snowfall. Judah Cohen is a winter weather expert at MIT. He told me we are experiencing a disruption in the polar vortex.
So the polar vortex is an area of low pressure way up in the atmosphere. So if you think of the atmosphere having 2 layers, the troposphere, that's where we live, the weather occurs. We have the jet stream that moves the weather systems along. And then above that is the stratosphere, and the polar vortex resides in the stratosphere. It's located, typically it's right over the North Pole. There's this fast-flowing ribbon of river air that goes counterclockwise or from west to east, quickly around in the Arctic mostly. When the polar vortex is strong and stable and the flow around is very fast, that keeps all the Arctic air locked up. Then it's much milder here. But what's happening here, I like to give the analogy of a figure skater. So, and the figure skate is doing a really great, nice, tight rotation. Everything remains close to that center rotation. So the arms are close to the chest, right? So when the polar vortex is doing a really nice spin, it's spinning very quickly. It keeps all the cold air near the center rotation, which is over the North Pole. But there are times, right, when the figure skater, it's a crack in the ice or whatever, and slips and starts, falling. So the arms flail out. But that polar vortex, its rotation also gets disrupted. And so all the cold air that was being kept over the North Pole is now released. And there's one type of disruption of the polar vortex that really favors sending the cold air into Asia first and then into the United States. And this type of disruption I call a stretched polar vortex. It's like taking a rubber band and stretching it out. And so when it gets stretched out like it is this week, that cold air can extend much further south, first into Canada and then to the U.S.
The figure skater analogy, it really is super helpful. Why the disruption, though?
These disruptions happened all the time. So it's nothing new. Nothing that's happening this week is new. But, there is a connection to climate change. The change in the Arctic, which has been seeing the most dramatic changes over the past 30, 40 years, the way that it's happening makes these types of polar vortex disruptions, in particular where it stretches out, happen more frequently or more often.
Well, you started leaning into this a moment ago, that the fuel that's stretching the polar vortex, again, not originating in North America per se, but up in the Arctic region. What is the connection? What is that fuel?
Yeah. So again, bringing back an analogy, ocean waves, right? These waves have energy. You just have little waves lapping at your feet. You're not disturbed by it, right? It doesn't bother you. But let's say there's a tempest offshore, or a hurricane or something, and these huge waves are coming. Now you really feel it, right? It can knock you over. And the same thing happens in the atmosphere. So I remember I told you the polar vortex, if it's doing its thing, it's doing this really nice, tight rotation above the North Pole. If in the atmosphere below it, the troposphere, the jet stream in particular, if you build waves in the troposphere and the jet stream, that gives off more and more energy. And now it's knocking at the polar vortex. And if the waves really grow to a significant magnitude or size, that could literally like knock the polar vortex off its perch and really kind of get it all kind of disrupted and knock it over. And that is what causes these disruptions of the polar vortex that then lead to an increase in severe winter weather.
And what grows those atmospheric waves?
Yeah, so they can happen randomly, just sometimes. But I've been arguing that Arctic change has supported magnifying or amplifying this wave across Eurasia.
Well, we've seen the Arctic breaking records for loss of sea ice and warming temperatures. Should we expect to see more storms of this scale?
Yeah, to a certain degree. Sea ice loss is not uniform, universal. It's not all sea ice loss is the same. But if it's focused in a certain region, that favors these disruptions of the polar vortex. And that area is the Barents-Kara Seas. But that's like near Scandinavia and northwest Russia, in that area of the Arctic. And they had, in October at least, they've had very low sea ice. It was like record low sea ice. And that has continued. We've seen quite a few of these stretched polar vortex events this winter, last winter as well. And I think that low sea ice has really kind of supported this like unusually high number of these type of events. Now, the stretched polar vortex, their impacts tend to be short term. So I think our winters are best explained by we have this one influence of just this general warming of the globe, which leads to milder temperatures, less snowfall. But we also have this change in the Arctic, which favors disrupting the polar vortex more. So we're seeing, in certain regions, whiplash, do this wild swing to the other end, right, of our winter weather.
Yeah, safe to say that figure skater analogy, that figure skater is going to get pretty wobbly later this weekend.
Yeah, I think the face plant might be the best way to put it.
That was Judah Cohen from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Naomi Osaka, the Japanese tennis star, has been wowing crowds at this year's Australian Open.
Naomi Osaka!
She's made it to the third round and plays again tomorrow, but it's not just her tennis game that's capturing the spotlight.
What an entrance this young lady has made tonight here on Rod Laver Arena.
Josh Eagle and Andrea Petkovic were the announcers on Australian Open TV.
That is quite the entrance.
It sure is, Josh, and I'm so glad that I was able to witness this because, as you know, I am a little bit of a victim for fashion, let's put it that way, and this is, of course, right up my alleyway.
You really do need to see the outfit, which is stunning. Osaka came out of the clubhouse wearing a wide brim hat, a long white veil, and holding a white parasol instead of the usual tennis bag. The whole outfit seeming to move in blue and green aquatic hues in her wake. It's said to be inspired by jellyfish.
I don't know. I just felt like switching it up. I think it's kind of fun to keep everyone on the edge.
In a news conference after the match, Osaka giggled when asked about her look during the walk-on. The outfit from designer Robert One was a surprise to her sponsor, Nike. She says the company was okay, though, with her choice of gear for that entrance.
The dress is beautiful. The jacket is beautiful. And sometimes I'm a little extra and I want something more. And Robert One was so amazing. And he kind of was able to lift it up while not pulling it down at the same time.
Robert One from Hong Kong is known for his colorful, flowing designs. This CNN story sums up his look.
Wine-stained, blood-splattered, burnt. Robert One's evocative and intricate designs upend expectations of what luxury looks like.
Or what athletic prowess looks like. The ever-chic Naomi Osaka has won 4 Grand Slam singles titles, including 2 here in the U.S. and 2 others in Australia. This is The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Oscar nominations are in, and the Iranian film It Was Just an Accident got 2 nominations, Best International Feature Film and Best Original Screenplay. The story is about a mechanic and former political prisoner who comes face to face with his former torturer. At least he thinks that's who it is. So he decides to kidnap the guy, but then has doubts if it is him, and then faces a decision about what to do with his captive. Jafar Panahi directed the film. He also shot lots of madcap scenes secretly and illegally in Tehran. Panahi joined me in the studio with his interpreter when the film first came out. He told me how his time in prison in Iran inspired the plot.
و حالا وقتی از زندان میای بیرون حس میکنی که نسبت به بچه‌هایی که داخل اون دور هستن یک
When I left prison, I felt responsible toward the fellow prisoners who were still inside. And this sense of responsibility and duty got heavier by the day until I decided to make a film about it.
خب با خودت میگی از کجا شروع کنم بعد میگی خب ما هممون یک
I asked myself where I could begin this film, and I realized that we all had a shared experience, and that was getting interrogated. While we were all blindfolded, we were sitting in front of a wall, and a man or an interrogator was walking behind us, asking questions. And we all wondered about our interrogators, what they looked like, who they were, and whether or not we were going to recognize them outside.
So let's talk about this one scene earlier on where 2 ex-prisoners are talking about this former torturer.
مطمئنی خودشه؟
نه واسه همین اومدم سراغ شما.
خب که چی؟
یعنی چی؟
گیرم که خودش باشه. میخوای چی کار کنی؟
من خودم ردیفش میکنم. شما نگران نباشید. نمیخوام شما تو درد سر بیفتید.
So these 2 former detainees are discussing what to do if this guy they've just kidnapped is actually their former interrogator and torturer. They get into this debate. What are they actually debating?
با اون میگه باید شناساییش بکنیم و اون میگه که من
In terms of what they say to each other, one of them, Vahid, wants to recognize the interrogator of them, wants to identify him, and Shiva says she cannot identify him because she was always blindfolded.
What's interesting is that not everyone in the group is in agreement about what to do with the man, even if they positively identify him as the torturer.
It is only natural for a person to first think about vengeance.
خب این سطح رویی خیلی چیز ساده‌ایه.
But that's only the surface theme, and it's very simplistic.
اما هر چی که جلوتر میریم
But the further we go, the more the humanistic conditions prevail.
خب حالا حتی ما اینو کشتیم چی میشه؟
They start wondering, let's assume we kill him, what then?
آیا همه مشکلات حل میشه؟
Are all of our problems going to fade?
این همون نقطه‌ایه که فیلم میخواد روش تاکید کنه.
And this is exactly the point that the film wants to emphasize on.
بحث خشونت یا بحث بخشش توی
The themes of violence and forgiveness in this film are only on the facade, and they're only in order to move the plot forward.
اما بحث بالاتر اینه که این چرخه خشونت تا کی باید ادامه پیدا کنه.
The bigger question is, how far is this cycle of violence going to continue?
Jafar Panahi, you spoke about the central question of the movie, the cycle of violence and how to end it. I mean, this question of the trauma of the person who's been tortured versus the trauma of the torturer from perhaps another experience in life. It's a really interesting one. How do you think about that?
شخصیت‌ها بارها میگن که
The characters keep repeating that this sound has been in their minds for several years. They must have thought about the moment as such. What are they going to do if this moment comes?
و شاید همون شکنجه‌گرم
Perhaps the torturer too must have thought about what happens if he gets recognized one day.
و حالا رسیدن به اون نقطه.
And they have both come to that point.
It's hard to imagine authorities don't know what you look like. What was the risk you took in filming in country?
مشکل این بود که وقتی ما اون سکانس
When we were shooting, we left the team in that location, and a few of us got in the van to go to another scene. But then, after a few kilometers, they called us and asked us to come back.
و گفتن که اومدن اینجا.
They told me that the set has been raided and they're looking for me. They have surrounded the team.
خب ما یه فرصت پیش اومد تونستیم وسایل رو پنهون کنیم برگشتیم.
We had an opportunity to hide the equipment and the dailies, and we did. Then we returned, and they kept us on the street for about 4 or 5 hours. But of course, they couldn't get their hands on anything, and because they were under the impression that we had just started shooting, they let us go. The next morning, though, they asked some of the team members into questioning, and they told them that they can no longer continue working with this project.
You have, as you said, been arrested and imprisoned for your work as a filmmaker, and your films are banned in Iran. At the same time, you're in some ways a country's cinematic record keeper. What is that like for you?
چون کار دیگه به غیر فیلمسازی بلد نیستم.
This is because I know no other work besides filmmaking.
من فقط یک پاسپورت دارم، اونم پاسپورت ایرانی.
I only have one passport, and that is the Iranian passport.
So that's really interesting. How do you see the future of cinema in Iran?
خیلی از فیلم‌های کوتاهی که الان داره ساخته میشه.
Many of the short films that are being made now in Iran, or the feature films that are just getting started, are really amazing.
خیلی جسورتر از ما و خیلی پر انگیزه ترن.
They are way more audacious and way more motivated than we were.
و همینه که آدم رو امیدوار میکنه برای.
And this is what gives us hope for the future.
Iranian film director Jafar Panahi, he joined us in our studio in Boston, along with interpreter Sheda Dayani. A big thanks to you both. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
It Was Just an Accident is up for 2 Oscars. I spoke with Jafar Panahi and his interpreter in late November. And now a few updates on stories we've been covering here at The World. In Japan, the controversial reopening of the world's biggest nuclear power plant has been put on hold. On Wednesday, it was all systems go for Kashiwazaki Kariwa. Then on Thursday, authorities said they ran into problems and suspended operations. That one day aside, the plant has been inactive since the Fukushima disaster in 2011. In Uganda, yesterday we heard from the head of the country's opposition, Bobi Wine. He was in hiding and spoke with us after the leader who's been in power for nearly 4 decades claimed victory in a disputed presidential election. Today, Uganda's military chief came out and said that authorities had killed 30 opposition supporters and arrested 2,000 of them. And finally, Ryan Wedding, the Olympic snowboarder from Canada, suspected of running an international cocaine operation, has been arrested in Mexico. We'll be right back. You're with The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. In Guinea-Bissau in West Africa, the Minister of Health has announced that the country is halting a controversial Danish-led and U.S.-funded trial of a hepatitis B vaccine. Officials in Guinea-Bissau say there are ethical concerns with the study. Dr. Bohuma Titonji studies infectious diseases at Emory University School of Medicine. She joined us from London to explain the issue.
The proposed study actually was a study where the researchers were wanting to look at something they call non-specific effects of vaccines. And they were doing that with the plan of basically randomizing a group of 7,000 newborn babies to receiving 2 BCG vaccine as well as the polio vaccine, and another group to receive the hepatitis birth dose vaccine and those 2 vaccines I've named. And the key ethical concern here was that one group of babies was going to be essentially deprived from receiving the birth dose of the hepatitis B vaccine, which is known to be effective in preventing hepatitis B acquired perinatally.
And obviously that's what made the study controversial.
Absolutely, because we know that the birth dose of the hepatitis B vaccine, when it's given immediately within 24 hours of delivery, it reduces the chances of babies who are exposed to the virus at the time of birth from acquiring infection by between 70 to 90%. And we know that Guinea-Bissau is one of the countries in the world with the highest levels of hepatitis B seropositivity in its population. So it's obvious that mothers who present to deliver babies, a significant proportion of these mothers will be carrying the virus. And that birth dose vaccine can prevent the babies from acquiring that infection by 90%. And to deprive them from getting that vaccine, of course, is obviously unethical.
So the researchers did amend the protocols, but you have described the changes as, quote, lipstick on a pig. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, the amendments that they made on the protocol did not change the core issue. The design remained the same in the sense that half of the children to participate in this trial were still going to be in a group where they did not receive the intervention that is known and proven to be beneficial. The amendments that they made were more procedural amendments, and they kind of clarified some of the testing and screening that mothers were going to receive prior to being enrolled in the study, but they did not change the core issue.
I know, Doctor, that you and the lead author of the study were in communication. What was their justification or defense of the study?
The main defense from the lead author was that it wasn't unethical for them to have a group of children that did not receive the birth dose because the birth dose of the vaccine is not available currently in Guinea-Bissau anyways. And he also justified it with the fact that maybe it's better to have at least some children in the study receive some form of vaccine because they were going to give the children the vaccine at 6 weeks and not at the birth dose. So this was basically saying that they were doing what is already happening within the country. So in that sense, it justifies it because they're providing what the kids will be able to have access to anyways. And I strongly disagreed with this because we know that you cannot exploit the scarcity of a beneficial intervention to pursue a scientific question.
So let's accept for a moment the premise of the study. What would be a more ethical alternative to it?
There is a type of ethical design that is something that we call a step wedge trial. And briefly, what this means is that in this particular instance, you're not leveraging scarcity, but rather you are embedding a clinical trial in the context of the vaccine rollout. So this is really a study that would be led by the Ministry of Health, in which the Ministry of Health is already introducing a vaccine, and you're not basically choosing one group of children who receive the intervention over another, but rather some children, you're following the normal flow, the natural flow of the rollout of the vaccine.
So the eyes of the world are not typically trained on the African continent, even less so on little Guinea-Bissau. How common is it for vaccine trials like this to be carried out first in an African nation?
A lot of vaccine trials have happened on the African continent. Now, the design of this study is not usual because we have ethical precedents or unethical studies that have happened in the past, which have allowed us to have ethical boundaries within which ethical clinical trials are to be conducted.
So, in your view, Dr. Titanji, what should be the takeaway from this controversy in Guinea-Bissau?
The takeaway for me is that even though we know how ethical research is supposed to be conducted, we have to remain vigilant every time we see a trial that is happening in any part of the world and ensuring that the safety of clinical trial participants anywhere that research is being conducted is being prioritized and safeguarded, particularly when these studies are happening in settings where the communities are vulnerable and where they might be power dynamic, where the voices of the people within the countries where these trials are happening may not be the loudest or the most prioritized.
Dr. Bohuma Titonji spoke with us today. She studies infectious disease at Emory University. It wasn't long after news broke that the U.S. military had captured Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro that celebration spread across South Florida. It is home to one of the largest Venezuelan communities in the United States. Many in the Sunshine State hoped the end of Maduro's reign would bring change, maybe even a chance to return home. but there's also a lot of anxiety about what comes next for the country, not to mention fear among the hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans across the U.S. whose legal status is uncertain. From Miami, the world's Tibisay Zea reports.
Inside a Miami comedy club, the crowd is packed, Venezuelan flags in the air.
¡Lo logramos, muchachos!
On stage is George Harris, one of Venezuela's best-known comedians. "We did it, people," he says. Harris had been on vacation from his weekly show here, but after news broke that Nicolás Maduro had been captured, he rushed back to stage a special performance.
Yo estaba en la playa tranquilo, mi vaina. Llegué a mi playa el 2 de enero porque
He says many Venezuelans here never believed Maduro would really fall, even with U.S. ships in the Caribbean, because, he says, Cuban exiles kept telling them not to get their hopes up.
Niño, olvídate de eso no va a pasar nada. Te lo digo yo que sobreviví al 71, 72, 73, 74.
Imitating the Cuban accent, Harris jokes that Cubans would tell him, "Don't even think about it. Dictators like this never fall."
Y gracias a Dios a nosotros nos tocó número ganador. Marico,
But this time, he says, Venezuelans hit, quote, "the winning ticket." For many in the room, the night feels like release.
Sí lo soñé, muchas veces lo visualicé preso, pero no pensé que lo iban a ver mis ojos.
Violeta Parra says she would dream about this moment for years, but never thought she would live to see it. She believes U.S. involvement is the only way Venezuela can truly change. Still, she doesn't see herself returning to Venezuela.
Mira, yo no me regresaría porque mis hijos ya hicieron vida aquí.
Look, my kids have built their lives here, she says. I wouldn't just leave them. The next morning, I drove west to Doral, a city where roughly 40% of residents are Venezuelan. It's jokingly referred to as Doralzuela. At a Venezuelan bakery, I met people whose hope is mixed up with fear, because their immigration status here is up in the air.
Yo tengo TPS, pero bueno, lo cancelaron. Y esas cosas al final no te dan una tranquilidad y una paz.
Edgar Muñoz says he no longer feels at peace since his legal protections disappeared. Hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans arrived in recent years and got a temporary protected status, or TPS. That's a humanitarian program that let them live and work in the U.S. because of a severe political and economic crisis back home. Under Trump, that protection is disappearing. When I ask Muñoz if he would go back to Venezuela,
Sí, si las cosas mejoran, pero primero tiene que ser con calma.
he hesitates but says yes, if things really improve. He's skeptical of real change coming soon. Another Venezuelan I spoke with recently lost TPS and is waiting on a student visa. He asked not to be identified. He says Trump's actions toward Venezuela and toward immigrants here feel contradictory.
Substituting a group of thugs for a slightly different group of thugs is not the solution here.
He doubts Venezuela will be a place he can return to anytime soon. But not every TPS holder sees it that way. Another Venezuelan I met, a piano teacher, says if forced to choose between a U.S. president who protects his immigration status or one who might help change Venezuela, he chooses Venezuela.
I would prefer the best for my people, you know. It's like we are like 900,000 Venezuelans here, but there are other 31 million there.
In an ideal world, he says, he wants a U.S. president who would protect Venezuelans in both places, but believes removing Maduro matters more. He feels optimistic about the future and is ready to go back home once the situation improves. For the World, I'm Tibisay Zea in Miami.
There's a holiday coming up in Australia marking the 1788 landing of England's First Fleet off Sydney Harbour. It's known appropriately as Australia Day. The celebration of this history, though, exposes persistent cultural wounds, especially for the indigenous people whose ancestors lived on the continent long before the arrival of colonial powers. A new play that opened this week in New York reimagines that history from an Aboriginal point of view. Reporter Jeff London sets the scene.
The Visitors is set on a rock by what is now Sydney Cove, where 6 Aboriginal elders and 1 young man meet to decide whether to welcome people from the 11 ships in the harbor or tell them to go away.
We speak one at a time, using the message stick. Agreed?
Yes.
We listen more than we speak. We all stay until we all agree, and the agreement is for the greater good, not favouring any one clan group. Agreed?
Yes.
No gossip!
Playwright Jane Harrison is a descendant of the Muruwari people of New South Wales. She says she got the idea to write an Australia Day play almost 20 years ago.
There hadn't been a play about the Aboriginal perspective on that event, and so I thought it's time for us to get our voice out there.
Harrison imagined her characters, Aboriginal elders, debating how to handle the new arrivals off their shores. Some want to fight the intruders. Others want to welcome them.
Well, I was very influenced by the play 12 Angry Men, and so I used that as a starting point.
12 Angry Men, the classic drama of a jury debating whether to convict or acquit a murder suspect.
I wanted to give my characters Western names, but kind of slightly old-fashioned names like Walter, etc.
Director Wesley Enoch, who's worked with Harrison on 3 plays, says there's a stage direction about how to costume these characters.
What Jane wrote in the play was they must wear suits as if they're at a board meeting, because contemporary Australia, in this case, the contemporary world must give status to these characters, that they are not infantilized natives sitting on a rock, that you can say is in the history. The story is absolutely made contemporary.
Well, I felt it was incumbent upon me as chair that we should meet, discuss and decide on a course of action. Gordon, respectfully, as this is your country, I'll pass the message stick to you.
Well, the plan is...
Playwright Jane Harrison says she's playing with time.
There's an Aboriginal concept of time, which is the past, the present and the future coexisting together. And that's what I really wanted to bring to the fore, that idea that, we live with the past. It's in our bodies. The bodies hold the score of colonisation.
Director Wesley Enoch says Australia Day is quite contentious for the Aboriginal community.
Because we go, yes, it's the beginning of the colonial project in this country, but it also is the beginning of our oppression, as Aboriginal people. Within 2 years of the colony being established, 2/3 of the Aboriginal population of the region died from smallpox, from frontier wars, from even just the common cold.
They left my country. They stayed for 3 days, then they left.
You are unwell.
And what Jane does is just subtly bring a lot of those elements into the play. And what I'm interested in is this notion of how the retelling of history can tell us something new about ourselves today.
Indeed, as the characters debate whether to let the visitors in, an ancient custom is invoked.
I wish to welcome you to country, the land which provides for us, our elders who guide us with their wisdom of the ages, our warriors who defend us, the stories and ceremonies which teach us law. And I welcome you, the respected elders of the surrounding nations.
Welcome to Country is a ceremony that Aboriginal people participate in to this day, and it involves an elder welcoming the people gathered there in the place. And they often talk about, you're welcome to this country from the tops of the trees to the roots of the trees. And I think it's such an act of generosity.
Even as the play demonstrates this Aboriginal generosity, Wesley Enoch says not all members of the cast were able to get visas to perform the play in New York.
We've had really big issues with visas getting into the United States, the kind of systemic criminalization of Aboriginal people over centuries. has meant that, there's a lot of things in our communities that when we go for a visa to come to the United States now, even if it's something we did as kids, we can't come, and it's one of those things that is a real shame.
So, to perform the play in the United States, Enoch had to bring in some new Aboriginal actors and leave others behind. Still, he adds,
our stories actually do resonate. We can teach each other how to be better human beings by listening to other people's stories.
The visitors will be at the Perlman Performing Arts Center in New York City through February 1st. For The World, I'm Jeff London, New York.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. Find us online anytime at theworld.org. I'm Marco Werman. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Judy Piggott, the Gruber Family Foundation, the Schmidt Family Foundation, and Gavin Salmonese, LLC. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.